We now return to the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles 2. Good morning to you, Mr. Naruhodo. Good morning, Professor. Ready for today's proceedings? I hope so. I should be. Even I, with nothing left to... Good morning, my dear fellows. It shows. Oh, Mr. Sholmes, you're here. Why, naturally, a true gentleman stands shoulder to shoulder with his friends in battle at all times. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'll see you later, then. Now, Professor, we really need you to remain calm in the courtroom today. Yes, do try your hardest not to enter the witness stand uninvited again. Yes, I will. I realize it was a mistake, but My dear fellows, I must interject. He must enter the witness stand today. For some convoluted reason, right? Oh, you're still here, Mr. Sholmes. What's the matter? Surely you've overlooked some praise, have you not, to be cast in my direction, hmm? Sorry, I don't follow. Must I spell it out? I, the great Herlock Sholmes, the greatest detective, or worldwide acclamation, arose at some ungodly hour to be here now, first thing in the morning. A miracle, you must agree. Well, if I must agree, then... As you know, my sleep is quite impregnable. Iris had to employ her full gamut of tactics. She pulled the covers off, shook me, poked both cheeks, punched me, and kicked me from the bed. Then she poured a boiling cup of her latest experimental blend on my face, and at last I was bestirred. Oh my, Iris has been busy. Iris doesn't have it in her to go that far. She's too nice. Ah, I sense the spirit of a fellow scientist, one who relishes the infinite possibilities of blending tea. I'm the one worthy of praise here, not Iris. This is my victory. Sorry to cut in. Oh, sorry. Oh, Inspector Gregson, we're gonna run all the voices before we even get in the damn courtroom today. Good morning. Gregson, my dear fellow, why the grim expression at this delightfully early hour? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because I've been confronted with a grimmer expression, eh? Dear me, are you going to take that insult lying down, Professor? What? I don't know. Poor Professor. Anyway, here's the paperwork you asked for. The paperwork. I took the liberty of requesting it yesterday. I have a feeling it may prove useful. You wouldn't believe the hoops I had to jump through to get this brought out of the archives. It's the professor's autopsy report. That mass murderers? Killed 5 members of the aristocracy. He was found guilty in a closed trial 10 years ago now. It was all done under wraps. And he was quickly executed soon after the trial. It's all in here. The killer's autopsy has been entered into the court record. I don't know what to say. Thank you, Inspector. Let me look at this while you stand there. Redacted. Pseudonym The Professor. Death by hanging. Confirmed at midnight. Courtney Stevens. Something makes me wonder. Did we look at this? I think we did. Makes me wonder if Courtney Stevens is going to enter into the conversation at some point. Yes, much obliged, Gregson. Us lowly lot at the yard are just doing what we can. The shadow of the great detective Sholmes, in the shadow of the detective Sholmes, of course. Well then, Professor Hairbrain, this is it. Today we're going to lay all this to rest at last. I wish you the best of luck, Professor. Are we? Are we nearly done with this? I suppose. He'll be in there today, will he? Trevor. Yes, we expect the prosecution to summon him as a witness. I'm still amazed that you managed to find him in just one day. I really owe you both so much. Counsel and the defendant. Trials are about to resume. Kindly make your way into the courtroom at once. This is it then, the final chapter. Funny, my heart's racing a little. I've not felt this before, actually. This strange foreboding. As if there's going to be way more than just this part of the trial left in this chapter. It seems like a very short chapter compared to the other ones. If this is indeed the end, something's going to happen in this trial that I'm not ready for. As always, there's always going to be that hidden turning point, right? But I can't let that distract me from the only thing that really matters. Finding the truth.
In the name of Her Majesty the Queen, I hereby declare this court to be in session again. We resume the public hearing of Albert Harebrain here present to stand accused of murder. Are the counsels for the prosecution and defense ready to proceed?
The prosecution is ready, my lord. The defense is ready, my lord. As promised, Lord Van Zieks has his apprentice with him. His apprentice with memory loss.
If I may, Lord Van Zieks.
Yes, my lord.
There appears to be someone standing at your side.
Ah, yes, my apprentice and assistant. The prosecution believes today's proceedings will see the complexity of this case rise considerably. This will be the unforeseen circumstance, no less. I therefore instructed my assistant to attend to ensure the smooth running of the trial. And the smooth running of liquid refreshments, by the look of it. The way he holds himself, the way he moves, it couldn't be anyone else. But he's still suffering from amnesia, so there's really nothing we can do at the moment. I know, but... Oh, this is so very hard. Why not show him the sword? His old sword. That'll bring it back.
It would appear the prosecution has done a fine job in responding to the demands of the court made yesterday. I understand you have successfully secured the engineer who disappeared from the scene on the day in question.
Yes, my lord. I intend to call him as a witness shortly.
Very good, very good. Now then, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we've been chosen at random to represent the will of the people in this courtroom today. Are you ready and willing to proceed?
Of course, my lord. I'm sure we all understand the importance of doing our civic duty. I don't know what your voice is anymore. I do so despise deception and deceit. I find it so very wearing. To take a man's life with a conjuring trick, I don't know if this is your voice either. It's against the magician's code, not to mention the law. We have to listen. No, shit. Potatoes. Combine harvester. We have to listen to what's said on both sides of the fence and then settle on one. That's it, isn't it? I don't know if that's how you use that accent or not. Combine harvesters. Sure.
I wouldn't like this in my day. Wasn't like this at all. I'm giving you all new voices because I don't remember. If all parties are ready to proceed, you may begin, Lord Van Zieks.
Before I do, my lord, there is a report I must read to the court. Yesterday at the Great Exhibition Grounds, evidence of primary importance in this case, the super high-voltage instantaneous kinesis machine, which was installed on the experimentation stage, was deliberately destroyed in an explosion effected by an unknown person or persons.
It was what? An explosion? It is nice. Yes, I heard this grave news yesterday. Scotland Yard submitted a report to my office in the evening. I read that the machine was blasted to smithers, and the wreckage reduced to ashes in the flames.
I have here a photographic print of the scene taken in the wake of the explosion. It shows what little remains of the machine, and the hole through which the cage dropped.
Yes, a terrible business.
he did it to destroy the evidence, did he? That Enoch Drebber.
The court will take this print as evidence, counsel.
Post-explosion photograph has been entered into the court record. Late yesterday afternoon, the protection afforded to the machine by the Special Dispensation for Scientific Equipment Act was revoked. However, before a thorough investigation could begin, the invention was obliterated from existence. As such, this will become a very different trial. One based purely upon speculation instead of evidence, no doubt. As it stands now, with no evidence on which to draw meaningful conclusions, as I said, the authenticity of the kinesis machine will remain forever in obscurity.
Indeed, a most unfortunate state of affairs.
However, one thing remains clear. The victim's death was the result of the actions of the accused. Of that we can be certain. For it was the accused himself who was operating the machine and who ultimately caused its loss of control. Have we started already? As Lord Van Zeeks rightly says, this is a very different trial now. The accused accepts responsibility for his part in the events that transpired. He acknowledges that Mr. Asman died as a result of the accident caused by his machine's malfunction. However, unbeknownst to the professor, he was being deliberately deceived by a pair of very clever fraudsters.
Names, counsel, if you please.
The engineer, Mr. Enoch Drebber, and the victim himself, Mr. Odie Asman. So what exactly were these two men up to behind the defendant's back? The defense intends to expose that information, thus establishing the unequivocal innocence of the defendant.
Thank you, counsels. The positions of the prosecution and defense have been clearly stated. Lord Van Zeeks, summon your first witness, please.
At once, my lord. The prosecution calls the engineer, Mr. Enoch Drebber, to the stand. State your name and occupation for the court. Name, Enoch Drebber. Occupation? Hard to pin down, I would say. See that black monocle? Yes, why do I feel as though I've seen it somewhere before?
Your file indicates that you are currently being investigated in connection with another case. The theft of a waxwork model, is it? A most extraordinary sounding business.
But that has no bearing on this trial, I assure you. Cleave it from your mind. You're familiar with the public experiment carried out at the Great Exhibition some days ago? The accused's super high-voltage instantaneous kinesis demonstration? Yes, you could say that. I am aware of it. There was a terrible accident, wasn't there? It was you, Mr. Drebber, who constructed the vast machine and used in the experiment. Also, our investigations indicate. Can you confirm your involvement? Yes, I constructed it. In precise accordance with the blueprints, but that's all. And the court would be very interested to hear your thoughts about the machine, I'm sure. God, we haven't even gotten to the actual testifying yet. An amazing device, if you ask me. The pinnacle of modern science, making instantaneous kinesis a reality at last. What?
Good gracious, do you mean to say that the experiment was bona fide? Is that your belief, sir?
Yes, that is very much my belief. Such a waste that it blew up.
Objection!
But we've already established the machine was nothing more than a prop for an elaborate conjuring trick.
Objection!
You've established nothing of the sort. All that was shown during yesterday's proceedings is that the same outcome could have been produced by means of staged trickery. The defense merely proposed a method and demonstrated its feasibility, nothing more. But
We've procrastinated long enough, I feel. Witness, you will now give your formal testimony. about the machine that you constructed for the purpose of the demonstration at the Great Exhibition.
Understood. I met the young professor approximately 1 year ago through Mr. Asman's introduction. He provided me with the blueprints, and I constructed the machine to his precise specifications. It was no trick. If the whole show was a fraud, it would have required a body double. Tell me, did the victim have a twin? All the spectators saw the birdcage appear above their heads, and then crash headfirst into the crystal tower. A terrible accident, I grant you. Perhaps the science on which the machine was built was flawed somehow. There's a lot of highlighted keywords there. A body double. It's the wax body, I already know. Let's just get to it. That goes without saying, surely. To give the impression that something has moved when, in reality, it hasn't. It's a basic conjuring principle. The deception cannot be achieved without substituting the original and with a fake at some point in the performance. But would I be right in saying you haven't managed to establish anything along those lines? Incidentally, the prosecution has already confirmed that Mr. Asman had no twin siblings.
It's my understanding that this witness is well versed in conjuring artfulness. But such talents do not indicate that he was actually able to accomplish what he claims. Namely, the construction of what, by all accounts, must have been an extremely complex scientific machine.
Whatever do you mean?
Yesterday's proceedings brought the true nature of your past exploits to light, Mr. Drebber.
Indeed it did, my lord. As a swindler who preys on innocent scientists to elicit government grant money through conjuring know-how. Yes, it's true that I possess considerable knowledge of stage magic. But, crucially, my scientific knowledge more than matches that of any academic in the field. Investigation of the witness's workshop attests to that claim, my lord. As evidence, the police found this Royal Society trophy for young talent in science there. Yes, that's true. We spotted it there ourselves. If a hypothesis is sound, it can always be forged into a physical manifestation with sufficient skill. Though I may have sold the secrets of some deceptive wiles to sniveling, talentless scientists in the past.
Would you therefore assert that the explosion of the machine was
an unfortunate accident, or, of course, a deliberate act of murder carried out by misuse of the science?
Counsel for the defense, your cross-examination, please.
Yes, my lord. The kinesis machine. The young professor 1 year ago.
Hold it!
So you were already acquainted with Mr. Asman himself? Not really. By chance, I'd seen his name mentioned in the papers, that's all. But I had no interest in his private affairs. If he was an unscrupulous investor, it was no concern of mine. As long as people pay their bills, I take up my tools and construct what they ask for. So why did Mr. Asman approach you in particular, then? Who can say? I presume because my name is associated with excellence in engineering. Not to mention excellence in fraud. Hard to gauge. But the point is, all I did was construct the machine according to the blueprints I was given. In other words, the kinesis machine was built on solid scientific principles. Yes, you might say that. Professor Harebrain certainly has a mind like no other. He provided me with the blueprints and I constructed the machine in precise of both hands. It's clear you have both scientific knowledge and knowledge of conjuring magic, however. The more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to handle whatever comes along. But your implication is that I furnished the machine with some trickery, I think? It's a possibility that we have to explore. Unfortunately, though, the machine was blown to Kingdom Come. So there's really nothing left to explore, is there? Is there? It appears that the kinesis machine was fitted with a timed explosive device of some kind. And there's nothing left of that device either. Not a single shred of evidence remaining, I hear. He must have planned all this from the outset. But in any case, it's abundantly clear that the experiment couldn't have been a trick. If the whole show was a fraud, it would have required a double.
Hold it!
Of course, that's it. Mr. Asman was a twin. We'd just established, goddamn you! Perhaps my learned friend wasn't listening earlier. Mr. Asman has no twin siblings. No, I heard you before, but the thread of hope hasn't quite left me. The demonstration could have been a trick if there was somebody who looked sufficiently like the victim. But Dr. Syed absolutely ruled that out as a possibility. We have the damned wax head. It is beyond question that the victim himself, Mr. Asman, did move from the stage to the Crystal Tower. The fingerprints found at the scene attest to that fact. So it can't have been orchestrated using someone who looked identical to Mr. Asman, then. What are you thinking, Mr. Naruhodo? Oh, nothing. Just that there was a black's body double. Just that the idea of someone who looked identical to the victim is playing on my mind. This is a heavy insinuation that this is where we need to be pushing. All the spectators saw the birdcage appear above their heads and then crash head first into the crystal tower. Wasn't head first.
Hold it!
It crashed head first, you say? According to the many witnesses' reports from those there at the time, yes. Were you not there at the exhibition grounds on the day? Unlikely. I rarely leave my workshop. Yet another of your unique inventions was found at the scene. Well, it was the unveiling of a machine I'd labored over for many months. I saw it clearly with my own eyes, the birdcage plummeting headfirst into the tower. A surprise. I believe the victim's neck was broken from the headlong fall, wasn't it? How would you have come by that information? Even an infernal recluse like me reads the newspapers, you know. According to the reports, 2 injuries were apparent on the victim's body. Let's see if that's true. Autopsy report. Hemorrhage of a wound in the chest. Broken vertebra. Doesn't really specify that's in the neck, though. Yes, he'd been stabbed in the chest by a screwdriver believed to belong to the defendant, and he had broken vertebrae as a result of a fall from a considerable height. Correct. My learned friend has been doing his research, it seems. Do we know which injury was the fatal one? Sadly not. Forensic science is not yet at a level where such things can be determined. What we do know is that the victim died having sustained both injuries at some point during the experiment. And since he was found in the birdcage with his neck broken, it's obvious that he fell from a considerable height. I suppose that's hard to deny. But the body had to have been moved, right? Because we found the glass shard in the pocket of the waxwork. A terrible accident. Perhaps the science was flawed. So you understood the science, did you? Not in the slightest. Oh, right. As I've said a number of times, I'm an engineer. My job is to manufacture according to the blueprints I'm given. I would be inviting manifold problems if I foolishly allowed my brain to digest the ideas behind them. I could be accused of stealing those ideas, for example. But how is it possible to construct a machine without really understanding the principles it relies on? Well, you're practicing law without really understanding the principles it relies on, aren't you? A very good point. Are we? Stand up for yourself, Mr. Naruhodo. The point is, the experiment resulted in instantaneous kinesis taking place. As such, the science must be sound. Yes, and really, experimental results are all that matters when it comes to proving a hypothesis. He's certainly very sure of himself. What do you think, Mr. Naruhodo? Well, now that the machine has been completely destroyed by yesterday's explosion, it's going to be impossible to argue its authenticity one way or the other. But if we're able to establish that it was a piece of stage trickery rather than genuine science, we will have no grounds on which to demonstrate... What? But if we're unable to establish that... Okay, we will have no grounds on which to demonstrate Professor Hairbrain's innocence. Both Mr. Asman and this man in the stand tricked the professor and used him. They took advantage of his naivety and his unbending belief in his work, and I won't let them get away with it. And seeing as the professor is an old friend of Lord Van Zeek's, what on earth must he be feeling toward Drebber? Alright. I met the young professor. The whole show was a fraud. Requiring a body double. Okay. Well, we don't yet know... Like, I'm going to suspect as soon as we crack this open, it's going to show the face of whoever's actually in there. What were we missing on this one? The plate lens, whatever. But we do have this. It didn't fall head first. So, I guess I can present that here? Yeah.
Objection!
We've examined the birdcage that crashed into the crystal tower ourselves. As you can see, the cage, which is a wooden construction, has sustained damage in one particular spot. Following the explosion, it fell some 30 feet into the glass of the crystal tower. That level of damage is to be expected, surely. I agree. The damage itself is entirely understandable. What doesn't make sense is the location of that damage. All the breakages in the wood are at the base of the birdcage, not the top. What are you saying?
It's the opposite of where they should be.
That's right, my lord. The birdcage that was at the scene is damaged at its base. So we have reports of the birdcage falling headlong into the crystal tower, yet the damage is at the bottom. The only way to reconcile these two facts is to accept that there were two bird cages in play that day, which were at some point switched. Switched during what wasn't a scientific experiment at all, but an elaborate piece of stage trickery. That's awkward. Why was half the word colored?
Good gracious, explain yourself, witness.
Well... If we examine the facts, there's only one logical conclusion we can draw. The damage on the base of the birdcage clearly indicates that it crashed tail first into the tower. But multiple witness reports claim it fell head first. The birdcage materialized in the sky next to a balloon flying over the stage following a spontaneous explosion, at an altitude of some 60 feet above the ground level, which is approximately 18 meters, thanks for that. It then proceeded to fall from 30 feet into the crystal tower in the ensuing deflagration. Witness reports amid such chaos are notoriously unreliable. But the victim's neck was broken. He plummeted 30 feet inside a heavy wooden cage. However he fell, it would be unsurprising to find one or two of his vertebrae crushed. A riveting scientific analysis of events from the prosecution there. Though, to be even more rigorous, you would have to say it was only one vertebra, actually. He wasn't quiet for long. I find it hard to see what's motivating Lord Van Zeeks. This witness is clearly a swindler and one who deceived a personal friend of his. If you're going to establish this deception, do it right. Sorry? I feel like that's the undertone here. Yes, and there's one more point. The defense appears to have forgotten. It obviously wasn't a trick, as a certain truth very plainly demonstrates. What?
It seems to me that the cross-examination had better continue until we resolve the matter. Mr. Drebber, you will amend your testimony with details of this truth.
Of course. We must deal. Fuck, I cannot read tonight. We must treat the matter scientifically, after all. I nearly had him there. The kinesis clearly took place because there's nowhere else 30 feet high for the birdcage to have fallen from.
Hold it!
I disagree. What do you mean? Well, before the demonstration began, the victim was alive on stage, in front of the audience. Yes, there are lots of witnesses who saw Mr. Asman on the experimentation stage, that's true. And the victim's neck broke as a result of an impact following a fall. Logically, therefore, the victim must have fallen from somewhere. The balloon that exploded was at an altitude of 60 feet. The point of impact on the tower was 30 feet up. The difference of 30 feet is therefore the total distance the birdcage fell. And there's no other location from which the cage could have fallen that distance if it didn't drop out of the sky. Ergo, the victim himself must have been beamed from the stage into the sky above the crystal tower.
A trenchant scientific analysis. Dear me, every time I hear it explained, it sounds increasingly plausible.
Oh, yes. It's all very well thought out. Certainly all the spectators on the day saw it. Birdcage plummeting 30 feet through the air, I mean. Irritatingly, yes. Okay, but... There's too much shit in my evidence now. So, I mean, we could show this, yes? Because that's where it fell. It doesn't necessarily have to have been 30 feet, though. I mean, it was a wooden cage in good condition. I don't think that tower looks to be 30 feet tall, by any means. Clearly took place because there's nowhere else 30 feet high for the birdcage to have fallen from. So what if we present that?
Objection!
No, that wasn't it. Surely something about that last statement seems odd, doesn't it? That wasn't it. So this then?
Objection!
This is a diagram of the experimentation stage and its surroundings. We know that somehow the birdcage appeared in mid-air before falling down into the crystal tower. A fall of about 30 feet, or 9 meters. However, if you examine the diagram carefully, you'll see that there is one other possible location from which the birdcage could have fallen. Same distance of 30 feet. No. No.
Well, it appears the defense has a possible explanation to put forward. Go ahead, counsel.
Yes, my lord, of course.
You will indicate the place to which you are referring on the same diagram. The alternative location from which the birdcage could possibly have fallen the requisite 30 feet.
I mean, it doesn't look that way, but I guess this is where we go, huh?
Take that!
The place I'm referring to is here.
But that's where the birdcage would have been to begin with.
Which is exactly the point, my lord. Yes, the birdcage was in the machine on the stage, but what we must also consider is the height of the stage itself.
Go on, counsel.
It turns out that the experimentation stage was built at a considerable height above ground level. If you look at the diagram, in fact, you'll see it's about the same height above the ground as the balloon was above the crash site. When the experiment got underway, the machine and the birdcage were engulfed in steam. At that moment, the floor of the stage gave way, and if we assume there to be a void underneath, this birdcage and the one seen by the audience would have fallen almost exactly the same distance. Once again, my lord, this all points to the fact that there was not one birdcage, but two.
Objection!
My learned friend has no evidence that the stage had such a contrivance in its design. Someone is responsible for the criminal destruction of the kinesis machine itself, it's true. However, the stage still stands. Take a moment to look at the photographic print of the scene following yesterday's explosion.
Good lord, the metal grill that formed the floor of the machine is undone.
Yes, most likely blown open by the force of the explosion that destroyed the rest of the machine. The defense calls for the space below the stage to be investigated, immediately. Mr. Drebber, it was you who built the kinesis machine, which means that it was you who built the two bird cages that were used to carry out this deception. Now, whether Professor Harebrain's hypothesis is sound or not makes no difference, because it's the construction of this machine that matters, a machine designed to take Mr. Asman's life. And lay the blame firmly at the professor's door, something that could only have been carried out by you, Mr. Enoch Drebber.
Objection!
I would like to point out that cutting off the cork would leave half of it still in the bottle. My learned friend has reached the end of his wild assertions. The prosecution would like to crush the defense's argument slowly, but surely. Well, your argument fails to hold water. On 2 counts. 2. Firstly, before and after the experiment, this witness went nowhere during... After the experiment, this witness went nowhere near the kinesis machine. Every relevant member of staff from the exhibition has attested to that.
And I believe members of Scotland Yard have also been on watch duty at every public experiment.
In other words, Mr. Drebber had no opportunity to switch the alleged pair of bird cages. But but I've already explained why he wouldn't have needed to. The nonsense with the crossbow, that doesn't bolster your case at all. The man who disappeared from the stage and the man who crashed into the tower are one and the same. The forensic investigation team's report is unequivocal on that point. And the second flaw in your assertion is a distinct lack of motive. Why would this man have wanted to take the victim's life? He had no reason to do so. A motive? Do I have to think of everything myself? I have here a contract provided by the witness.
What contract is that, Lord Van Zeeks?
The contract into which Mr. Drebber entered with the victim, Mr. Asman. It reads, Mr. Drebber is to receive 30% of all remunerations from government grants or other income.
30%. Certainly very favorable contractual conditions.
But why 30 when it could be more? But there was one very important provision bolted onto that clause. What provision? Mr. Drebber may only uphold this right on condition that both contracting parties are alive. In other words, if either of us were to die, the contract would become null and void. So, you see, I had nothing to gain from Mr. Asman's death. The diametric opposite, in fact. We just rule the death an accident, then. Need I say more? The witness had neither an opportunity nor a reason to commit the alleged crime. In short, the possibility of Mr. Drebber having done as you suggest is nil.
It seems the defense's assertion was somewhat wide of the mark. Lord Van Zeeks, you will submit the contract as evidence, please.
This contract's been entered into the court record. It's true. If Drebber had no opportunity to switch the birdcage under the stage with the one in the Crystal Tower, why do we assume he didn't have an accomplice? The fun club. He couldn't have done it. And in any case, I have no idea what his motive might have been. There is one aspect of your argument that still holds true, however. There were 2 bird cages. The prosecution is unable to deny that. So I'm sure you're on the right lines, Mr. Naruhodo, and I've no doubt there are other aspects of your assertion that are undeniable truths, too.
Well, it would seem that the defense has no rejoinder to offer.
Well, I must say, I'm a little surprised. I came here to testify about the machine I built, and instead my reputation is defiled. But the prosecution's counter has set the record straight, I think. It's impossible that I'm the culprit.
Protection.
At the beginning of this trial, we believed that there was only 1 birdcage. Yet now we know there must have been 2. In other words, there was more to the demonstration than we realized at first. I think it's abundantly clear that the same applies to the culprit. Get to the point. The stage demonstration was constructed and set up in its entirety by you, Mr. Drebber. Therefore, it's inconceivable that you had no hand in the events that transpired. So if circumstances mean it's impossible that you could have carried out the crime yourself, it points to the fact that someone else was involved.
Someone else? Counsel, are you suggesting...
Actually, didn't we just read about that? And I already... Well, yeah, I guess it would be this, right? Because the professor is Asman. Or was this the professor? And fuck, I don't remember who's who now. No, Asman. Asman was the professor. Actually, we can look at people, right? He was Professor... Oh, okay. No. We established that someone was the professor, though, or was using the professor as their pseudonym. I don't know, whatever. Yes, my lord, Mr. Drebber had an accomplice. An accomplice now. Well then, I presume you are prepared for what's to come. Now that you are accusing not only this witness, but someone else of the most serious of crimes. If these accusations turn out to be false, then make no mistake. The prosecution will demand an equally serious punishment for your slander.
Well, counsel, do you intend to pursue this course and formally accuse another party of involvement in this matter?
What do I do here? At the moment, this is little more than a hunch on my part. I don't know for sure if Drebber had an accomplice, or even if he really is the culprit here. One way or another, though, I have to make my position clear, as a lawyer. So what's my stance going to be? Did Drebber have an accomplice, or not? Obviously, we must do so. The defense is ready to name Mr. Drebber's accomplice. Somehow the two bird cages must have been switched. Everything points to that. Yet according to the coroner's report, that's not a possibility. But that inconsistency itself is a clue.
Counsel,
Huh? My lord?
you have received a stark warning already. If you are nevertheless determined, then I must now ask you to identify this alleged accomplice by name. So, your answer, please. Who do you claim to have been Mr. Drebber's accomplice?
Well, obviously he could not have switched the cages because, apparently he's dead, so by accident or by design. Even though he was an accomplice of Drebber, not in this situation. This guy we know is not a part of this, and he's supposedly the victim here. We must assume he's innocent. We know that that's what's-his-face. She's probably not. This guy's a balloonist. That guy definitely doesn't. Like this, he has no vested interest in doing any of this, right? Because of his balloon business. But Courtney Scythe is the coroner. Courtney Scythe is the coroner who said about the death of Asman and who said the death of the professor. And if I'm right that this guy was the professor, then there's some shenanigans going on there where the body was switched or whatever, and then they did it again. She's the only other person who's not a main character that's a part of any of these, and she was in fact alone with all of this crap.
Take that!
The name of the person in question is... What's wrong, my Nepalese friends? Surely fear doesn't bind your tongue now. It's a little late for that. Of course I'm afraid. After all, naming her in this capacity is definitely going to make waves. A lot of waves. I could very well turn every single person in this courtroom against me. I'm sure it will be all right, Mr. Naruhodo. Thank you, Miss Sato. The enemy always appears larger than life, and you'll appear exactly the same to the enemy. What? Will I? All right then, here goes. You've kept us waiting long enough. Your answer, counsel. Now. The person who's colluded with Mr. Drebber in order to carry out this wicked crime is Scotland Yard's coroner, Dr. Courtney Scythe.
What the blazes are you talking about? Dr. Scythe?
The head of the forensic investigation team and the coroner who conducted the autopsy on the victim? We know there were two bird cages, so who could have carried out the switch to complete the illusion? The accident happened in front of a huge crowd of spectators and the area was immediately sealed off. Then everyone, police officers included, were banished to make way for the forensic investigation team. When else could the switch have occurred? It can only have been in that team's presence. It's essential that the court determines exactly what happened following the incident. The defense demands that Dr. Scythe be summoned to the stand at once to testify. You've got a nerve, lad. Standing up there, dragging the yard's name through the mud. You've had like 5 voices at this point. I didn't mean to. I know the woman very well. There's no better dead room worker out there. How dare you call her a criminal? My learned friend's imagination appears to be wilder than the East End at night. But the recklessness of your accusation aside, there's another grave problem with your argument. One which the prosecution demands you address at once. A grave problem? Oh my word. A grave problem. Like the body in the grave in the Waxwork Museum. Who do you claim acted as the victim's doppelganger? What?
Certainly, if the birdcage containing the body of the victim was exchanged for another, that cage must also have contained a body.
And yet, no missing persons or accidental deaths of anyone even remotely resembling the victim have been reported. Which means there was no one, dead or alive, who could have fulfilled the role of a body double for Mr. Asman. That's true. If my argument is that there were 2 bird cages, then there must also have been 1 person inside each. But I don't know if I've got an answer to this yet, have I? What can I do to reveal how this body double stunt was achieved? Present evidence. Very well. The defense will address my learned friend's concerns by presenting evidence that reveals the true nature of Mr. Asman's body double.
Oh, good gracious, evidence? I do hope this isn't filibustering, counsel. The court is expecting a name.
If you think you have relevant evidence, present it now. The body double and the birdcage were hiding inside the balloon that was floating above the stage, which means that any witnesses would only have seen them from 60 feet away. So who was it that appeared out of that explosion some 18 meters above the spectators? Aha. Oh my god, the body double inside the birdcage was the Wax Head.
Take that!
We know the victim, Mr. Asman, was in the birdcage that was situated inside the kinesis machine on stage, and therefore he couldn't have been inside the second birdcage. Instead, that contained something else. What's been described as a body double, which is what fell from the sky and crashed into the Crystal Tower.
Yes, counsel, according to your somewhat elaborate version of events.
And that body double inside the second birdcage was, in fact... It's all right, Mr. Naruhodo. You're ready for this. Just steel yourself and come out with it. Thank you, Mr. Sato. I needed that. Need a smack in the head is what you need. Get on with it. As I was saying, the body double inside the second birdcage was, and as unbelievable as it may seem, that thing there. How the fuck did we get this? Was that in my pocket?
Objection!
Open your eyes and look into mine, my Nipponese friend. Now, tell me, what are you playing at? Stand firm now, Ryunosuke. This is the time to show your Japanese spirit. As the court will observe, this is a waxwork model. A model, in fact, of an infamous London murderer from 10 years ago, the Professor.
Objection!
You started by indicating the leader of the forensic investigation team as an accomplice in this crime. And now you've moved on to indicting waxworks? Yes, that's about the size of it. But why? And why this waxwork? It looks nothing like the victim. In fact, it could hardly resemble him less. What possible justification can you give? If you want to know why, ask Mr. Drebber. What? Just days before Professor Hairbrain performed his public demonstration, Mr. Drebber abducted this model from Madame Tuspel's.
Did you say abducted?
And 2 days after the incident at the Great Exhibition, he returned it to the museum. Then the timing...
Is this true, Mr. Drebber?
At first, I couldn't see why Mr. Drebber would have stolen the waxwork and then given it back again. But now the reason is clear. Took it so that he could put it inside the second bird cage as a body double for Mr. Asman. We just have to open the damn thing and see if the face matches. Are you hearing this, ladies and gentlemen of the jury? Are you hearing the defense's astonishing proposal? The witness fabricated this vast machine with the intention of deceiving some wretched scientist. That he did so in collusion with the country's finest coroner on a public stage in front of a vast audience. And that, to effect the deception, he used a waxwork model that in nowhere resembles the victim. Are we really to believe this far-fetched tale? What do you decide?
Objection!
Wait. Yes, if you put it like that, of course it sounds implausible.
My lord, I need to speak, if you please. Go ahead, Mr. Foreman. Pick a voice, please. Myself and my colleagues have reached an agreement. Very good, in that case. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will state for your leanings for the court to hear now.
Guilty.
Guilty! Guilty!
Guilty.
Guilty!
Kill me.
Of course.
So, as indicated by the foreman, the jury has reached a consensus.
I knew that was going to happen. We shall get through this, Mr. Naruhodo, as we always do. And uncover some new truths along the way, I'm quite sure, as we always do. Yes, I agree. I'm going to have to appeal to the jurors as usual and see if I can persuade them to change their minds.
The defense will now embark on a summation examination. Are you and your fellows ready to proceed, Mr. Foreman?
We are, my lord.
That's not your voice, but okay, very well. In that case, I ask you now to state clearly for all present to hear the grounds on which each of you has decided that the defendant is guilty of the crime of which he is charged.
Yes, but we're not going to do that right now. I'll end this one here. I'll see you next time.